Australia's apocalyptic bushfire struck with a frightening ferocity in 2020.
There's nothing left.
And I want to drill down the numbers here because they may not sound like a lot, but they are huge in what differences result as temperatures go from 1.5 degrees Celsius to 2. Huge difference.
The Philippines tops a list of countries susceptible to hazards caused by climate change. A think tank cited by the 2019 Global Peace Index notes nearly half of the country's population live in areas highly exposed to climate hazards like drought, tropical cyclones, floods, and tsunamis. Other countries at the top of the list include Japan, Bangladesh, Myanmar, China, Indonesia, India, Vietnam, and Pakistan.
As if 2020 wasn't strange enough already, the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge remains shrouded in smoke, in a pale comparison to what the morning commute looked like this week. Smoke and ash from wildfires mixed with the cool Pacific Ocean air to produce an otherworldly effect.
Over the course of millions of years, the global climate has experienced fluctuations. Since the beginning of industrialization, however, the composition of the atmosphere has changed as a result of greenhouse gas emissions. This global warming caused by human beings intensifies the natural greenhouse effect and is leading to detectable changes to the climate. This global warming also has a significant effect on people and nature. But what causes climate change?
From the Paris Climate Accord.
From 1906 to 2005, the average global temperature rose by 0.74 degrees Celsius, with most of that warming occurring since 1970. By 2015, the average global temperature had warmed by over 1 degree Celsius since pre-industrial times. 16 of the 17 warmest years on record have been in the 21st century. This warming isn't the same everywhere. Some areas with crucial ecological importance, like around the poles, are warming at 2 or 3 times the global average. Chapter 1: Greenhouse Gases. Greenhouse gases are thought to be the main contributor to climate change. They are very efficient in trapping heat into the atmosphere. Therefore, it results in the greenhouse effect. The solar energy is absorbed by the Earth's surface and then reflected in the atmosphere as heat. Then, as the heat goes out to space, greenhouse gases absorb a part of the heat. After that, they radiate the heat back to the Earth's surface, to another greenhouse gas molecule. Daniela Borgila stated that the biggest concern scientists have is about the emission of carbon dioxide, since it is about 75% of the total global emission of greenhouse gases. According to L.A. Berbisi, the present-day warming trend has been attributed to an annual increase in the atmospheric methane concentration and carbon dioxide. The Berbisi study also investigated the potential of methane contribution to the atmosphere during the evolution of the petroleum system in 2 different geological settings, the Western Canada Sedimentary Basin and the Central Graben area of the North Sea. Numerical simulation and different types of mass balance, as well as theoretical approaches, were applied. In Western Canada, maximum thermogenic methane leakage rates of about 10 teragram per year were estimated. In the Central Graben case, there was an estimate of maximum thermogenic methane leakage of 10.3 teragram per year. Applying the results to a global scale shows that thermal gas generation in hydrocarbon single-process kitchen area would not influence climate. On the other hand, Only the sudden release of surface methane accumulations formed over geological timescales, petroleum system can influence climate.
The United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord.
On June 1st, 2017, United States President Donald Trump announced that the U.S. would cease all participation in the 2015 Paris Agreement on climate change mitigation, contending that the agreement would undermine the U.S. economy and put the U.S. at a permanent disadvantage. The Paris Agreement, being an agreement that aims to keep the global temperature rise this century well below 2 degrees Celsius, above pre-industrial levels, and to pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase even further to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Trump's decision to withdraw the U.S. was backed by Republicans but was strongly opposed by Democrats. Trump's decision to withdraw was strongly criticized in the US and abroad by environmentalists, some religious organizations, business leaders, and scientists. A majority of Americans also opposed withdrawal. Scientists believe humans' activities contribute to climate change because we depend on fossil fuels for our energy needs. Webbles said, "A large amount of climate change happens widely because we are burning fossil fuels, and that increases gases such as carbon dioxide, methane, and some other gases in the atmosphere." And according to the Australian Greenhouse Office, the world depends on fossil fuels such as oil, coal, and natural gas for 80% of its energy needs. Therefore, that makes it very hard to switch from fossil fuels to any other forms of energy because we depend on fossil fuels to a large degree. The emission of greenhouse gases has increased dramatically from the Industrial Revolution, mostly from the burning of fossil fuels for energy, agriculture, industrial process, and transportation. The graph on screen shows how much carbon dioxide and methane increased in the last 250 years. The graph was done by taking a sample of ice and another sample was taken from the atmosphere. For the ice sample, drilling a hole through the ice sheets and looking at the air molecules inside the sample determined the concentration of carbon dioxide and methane. The graph illustrates that carbon dioxide levels have increased nearly 38% from 1750 to 2009, and methane levels have increased 148%. Chapter 3: Natural Causes. According to Holly Rebeek, the author of the book titled Global Warming, nature also contributes to climate change by emitting carbon dioxide from volcanoes. Don Webbles, a coordinating lead author and contributor to a number of the reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007, and a professor of atmospheric sciences at the University of Illinois, stated, "Volcanoes used to release carbon dioxide many million years ago, back when dinosaurs existed. We had levels of emission that is approximately similar to what we have now because of the carbon dioxide emitted by volcanoes. But volcanoes release a small amount of it, and they can't explain the increase of carbon dioxide that we had in the last century. Volcanoes do contribute to climate change by emitting carbon dioxide. However, the amount they emit is relatively small if we compare it to the amount that is being released by human activity. According to NASA, on average, volcanoes emit between 130 and 230 million tons of carbon dioxide per year. However, by burning fossil fuels, people release in excess of 100 times more, about 26 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere every year. What is the solution to climate change? So at this point, I think we're fully aware that climate change has a very large negative impact on our environment. Not only that, it's also bad for the people. What about you? Can you or me do anything about this issue? Number 1, refrigerant management. Every refrigerator, supermarket case, and air conditioner contain chemical refrigerants that absorb and release heat, making it possible to chill and keep buildings and vehicles cool. Refrigerants, specifically chlorofluorocarbons (CFCs) and hydrochlorofluorocarbons (HCFCs), were once key culprits in depleting the stratospheric ozone layer, which is essential for absorbing the sun's ultraviolet radiation. Thanks to the 1987 Montreal Protocol on Substances that Deplete the Ozone Layer, CFCs and HCFCs have been phased out of use. It took 2 short years from the discovery of the gaping hole over the Antarctic for the global community to adopt a legally mandated course of action. Now, 3 decades later, the ozone layer is beginning to heal. Refrigerants continue to cause planetary trouble, however. Huge volumes of CFCs and HCFCs remain in circulation, retaining their potential for ozone damage. The replacement chemicals, primarily hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs, have minimal deleterious effect on the ozone layer, but their capacity to warm the atmosphere is 1,000 to 9,000 times greater than that of carbon dioxide, depending on their exact chemical composition. In October 2016, officials from more than 170 countries gathered in Kigali, Rwanda, to negotiate a deal to address the problem of HFCs. Despite challenging global politics, they reached a remarkable agreement. Through an amendment to the Montreal Protocol, the world will begin phasing HFCs out of use, starting with high-income countries in 2019, and then expanding to low-income countries, some in 2024, others in 2028. HFC substitutes are already on the market, including natural refrigerants such as propane and ammonia. Unlike the Paris Climate Agreement, the Kigali deal is mandatory with specific targets and timetables. Number 2. Onshore wind turbines. Everywhere. The variable nature of wind means there are times when turbines are not turning. Critics argue that turbines are noisy, aesthetically unpleasant, and at times deadly to bats and migrating birds. Another impediment to wind power is inequitable government subsidy. The International Monetary Fund estimates that the fossil fuel industry received more than $5.3 trillion worldwide in direct and indirect subsidies in 2015. In comparison, the U.S. wind energy industry has received $12.3 billion in direct subsidies since 2000. Today, 314,000 wind turbines supply 3.7% of global electricity. It will soon be much more. In 2015, a record of 63 gigawatts of wind power were installed around the world, despite a dramatic drop in fossil fuel prices. In many locals, wind is either competitive with or less expensive than coal-generated electricity. In the US, the wind energy potential of just 3 states. Number 3. Reduce food waste. A third of the food raised or prepared does not make it from a farm or factory to fork. That number is startling, especially when paired with hunger, a condition of life for nearly 800 million people worldwide. The food we waste contributes to 4.4 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent into the atmosphere each year, roughly 8% of total anthropogenic greenhouse gas emission. In places where income is low and infrastructure is weak, food loss is typically unintended and structural in nature. Bad roads, lack of refrigeration or storage facilities, poor equipment or packaging, a challenging combination of heat and humidity. Wastage occurs earlier in the supply chain, rotting on farms or spoiling during storage or distribution. In regions of higher income, unintentional losses tend to be minimal. Willful food waste dominates further along the supply chain. Retailers reject food based on bumps, bruises, coloring, aesthetic objections of all that sorts. Other times, they simply order or serve too much, lest they risk shortages or unhappy customers. Similarly, consumers spurn imperfect spuds in the produce section, overestimate how many meals they will cook in a week, toss out milk that has not gone bad, or forget about leftover lasagna in the back of the fridge. Basic laws of supply and demand also play a role. If a crop is unprofitable to harvest, it will be left in the field. And if a product is too expensive for consumers to purchase, it will idle in the storeroom. Regardless of the reason, the outcome is the same. Producing uneaten food squanders a whole host of resources: seeds, water, energy, land, fertilizer, hours of labor, financial capital, and generates greenhouse gases at every stage, including methane when organic matter lands in the global rubbish bin. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals call for having per capita global food waste at the retail and consumer levels by 2030, as well as reducing food losses along production and supply chains. The interventions that can be addressed key waste points in the food chain are numerous and varied. In lower income countries, improving infrastructure for storage, processing, and transportation is essential. Strengthening communication and coordination between producers and buyers is also paramount for keeping food from falling through the cracks. Given the world's many smallholder farmers, producer organizations can help with planning, logistics, and closing capacity gaps. In higher income regions, major interventions are needed at the retail and consumer levels. Most important is to preempt food waste before it happens, for greatest reduction of upstream emissions, followed by reallocation of unwanted food. Standardizing date labeling on food packages is an essential step. Currently, sell by or best before dates and the like are largely unregulated designation, indicating when food should taste best. Though not focused on safety, these markers often confuse consumers about expiration. Number 4. Adoption of a plant-rich diet. The Western diet comes with a steep climate price tag. The most conservative estimates suggest that raising livestock accounts for nearly 15% of global greenhouse gases emitted each year. The most comprehensive assessments of direct and indirect emissions say more than 50%. Outside of innovative practices described in another section of Drawdown, the production of meat and dairy contributes many more emissions than growing their sprouted counterpart: vegetables, fruits, grains, and legumes. Ruminants, such as cows, are the most prolific offenders, generating the potent greenhouse gas methane as they digest their food. In addition, agricultural land use and associated energy consumption to grow livestock feed produce carbon dioxide emissions, while manure and fertilizers emit nitrous oxide. If cattle were their own nation, they would be the world's third largest emitter of greenhouse gases. Overconsumption of animal protein also comes at a steep cost to human health. Eating too much of it can lead to certain cancers, strokes, and heart diseases. Increased morbidity and healthcare costs go hand in hand. With billions of people dining multiple times a day, imagine how many opportunities exist to turn the tables. It is possible to eat well in terms of both nutrition and pleasure, while eating lower on the food chain and thereby lowering emissions. A groundbreaking 2016 study from the University of Oxford modeled the climate, health, and economic benefits of a worldwide transition to plant-based diets between now and 2050. Business as usual emissions could be reduced by as much as 70% through adopting a vegan diet and 63% for a vegetarian diet, which includes cheese, milk, and eggs. The model also calculates a reduction in global mortality of 6 to 10%. The case for a plant-rich diet is robust. That said, bringing about dietary change is not simple because eating is profoundly personal and cultural. For individuals to give up meat in favor of options lower on the food chain, those options should be available, visible, and tempting. Number 6. Protest. Climate protests were held in streets and squares around the world in 2019, demanding that world leaders address the threat of global warming, including reducing greenhouse gas emissions, with Swedish teenager Greta Thunberg spearheading a global activist movement by launching a wave of school walkouts to demand action. The September 2019 climate strikes, also known as the Global Week for Future, were a series of international strikes and protests to demand actions be taken, which took place from 20 to 27 of December, and over 150 countries joined to the protest. Number 7. Solar farm. Solar farms are large-scale arrays of hundreds, thousands, or hundreds of thousands, or in some cases millions of panels that achieve generating capacity in the tens or hundreds of megawatts. These social farms operate at utility scale, more like conventional power plants in the amount of electricity they produce. The first solar photovoltaic PV farms went up in the early 1980s. Now, these utility-scale installations account for 65% of additions to solar PV capacity around the world. If Ukrainian officials have their way, Chernobyl, the site of a mass nuclear meltdown in 1986, will house a 1 gigawatt solar farm, which would be one of the world's largest. Public investment, tax incentives, technological evolution, and brute manufacturing force have chipped away at the cost of creating PV, bringing it down to 65 cents per watt today. The decline in price has always outpaced predictions, and drops will continue. Informed predictions about the cost and growth of solar PV indicate that it will soon become the least expensive energy in the world. It is already the fastest growing. Compared to rooftop solar, solar farms enjoy lower installation costs per watt, and their efficacy in translating sunlight into electricity is high. When their panels rotate to make the most of the sun's rays, generation can be improved by 40% or more. No matter where solar panels are placed, they are subject to the diurnal and variable nature of solar radiation and its misalignment with electricity use, peaking midway while demand peaks a few hours later. That is why, as solar generation continues to grow, so should complementary renewables that are constant, such as geothermal, and that have rhythms different from the sun, such as wind, which tends to pick up at night. Energy storage and more flexible grids can manage the variability of production from PV farms will also be integral to the success of solar farms. The International Renewable Energy Agency already credits 220 million to 330 million tons of annual carbon dioxide savings to solar PV. Could solar rise from 2% of the global electricity mix to meet 20% of global energy needs by 2027? As some University of Oxford researchers calculate, thanks to complementary government interventions and market progress, there are many promising signs. Number 8, electric vehicles. President Joe Biden said Monday the U.S. government would replace the entire federal fleet of cars, trucks, and SUVs with electric vehicles manufactured in the United States. A commitment tied to a broader campaign promised to create 1 million new jobs in the American auto industry and supply chains. An electric vehicle, or EV, is one that operates on an electric motor instead of an internal combustion engine that generates power by burning a mix of fuel and gases. Therefore, such vehicle is seen as a possible replacement for current generation automobile in order to address the issue of rising pollution, global warming, depleting of natural resources, and etc. Though the concept of electric vehicles has been around for a long time, it has drawn a considerable amount of interest in the past decade amid a rising carbon footprint and other environmental impacts of fuel-based vehicles. Electric vehicles is good for our environment because they don't use fuel. Instead, they use batteries. Research has shown that electric cars are better for the environment. They emit less greenhouse gases and air pollutants over their life than a petrol or diesel car. This is even after the production of the vehicle and the generation of electricity required to fuel them is considered. Number 9. Rooftop solar panels. The era of fossil fuels is over, and the only question is when the new era of clean energy will be upon us. Solar photovoltaics are only 2% of the global electricity mix at present. Solar photovoltaics, or PV, have seen exponential growth over the past decade. In 2015, distributed systems of less than 100 kilowatts accounted for roughly 30% of solar PV capacity installed worldwide. While the production of PV panels, like any manufacturing process, involves emission, they generate electricity without emitting greenhouse gases or air pollution. When placed on a grid-connected roof, they produce energy at the site of consumption, avoiding the inevitable losses of grid transmission. They can help utilities meet broader demand by feeding unused electricity into the grid, especially in summer. This net metering arrangement can make solar panels financially feasible for homeowners, offsetting the electricity consumers buy at night when the sun is not shining. Rooftop PV is accelerating access to affordable, clean energy and thereby becoming a powerful tool for eliminating poverty. It is also creating jobs and energizing local economies. In Bangladesh alone, 3.6 million home solar systems have generated 115,000 direct jobs and 50,000 more downstream. Roof modules are spreading around the world because of their affordability. Solar PV has benefited from a virtuous cycle of falling costs, driving by incentives to accelerate its development and its implementation. Economies of scale in manufacturing, advances in panel technology, and innovative approaches for end user financing. Small scale PV already generates electricity more cheaply than it can be bought from the grid in some parts of the US, in many small island states, and in some countries including Australia, Denmark, Germany, Italy, and Spain. Conclusion. Human-induced climate change has contributed to changing patterns of extreme weather across the globe, from longer and hotter heat waves to heavier rains. From a broad perspective, all weather events are now connected to climate change. While natural variability continues to play a key role in extreme weather, climate change has shifted the odds and changed the natural limits, making certain types of extreme weather more frequent and more intense. While our understanding of how climate change affects extreme weather is still developing, evidence suggests that extreme weather may be affected even more than an extreme weather is on the rise, and the indications are that it will continue to increase in both predictable and unpredictable ways. So you reached the end. How's it feel?